What you are about to hear is a reading from a newspaper that is decades old. I read the articles exactly as they were written. Many of the terms might be found as offensive by today's standards. I read the stories cold, I just don't have the time to pre-read the articles. After all, I'm like many of you, I have a regular career, while this is just a hobby. I am not bilingual, I barely speak English well, nor am I an historical scholar. Because of that, I will mispronounce the names of foreign people and places. And also keep in mind that many stories are not historically accurate. Either the news was suppressed at the source or historical scholars have not analyzed them yet. This channel is designed to put you at that place and time and to show you what an average American knew. If you enjoy this content, please subscribe. I also have another channel where you can hear the newsmakers and entertainment of the day. It's called the World War II Old Time Radio channel. That link is in the expanded description to this video. Now for the news. News as read from the Chicago Tribune for Wednesday, January 29th, 1941. The weather today. The sun rose at 7:06 a.m. It set at 5:01 p.m. For Chicago and vicinity, partly cloudy to cloudy today and tomorrow. Not much change in temperature. Light to moderate northeast winds today. The low temperature, 23 degrees. The high temperature, 26. Today's headline, British plea aid blockade. Washington, D.C., January 28th. An admission by the Roosevelt administration that it intends deliberately to violate the Declaration of Panama of 1939 through passage of the Dictator Bill was followed today by word that Great Britain is urging this country to more drastic action in wiping out the neutrality belt around the Americas. The Dictator Bill would permit belligerent warships to repair and refit in American ports and make such ports virtually bases for naval operations. That this would be a clear violation of the Panama Agreement was the testimony of William R. Castle, former Undersecretary of State, before the House Foreign Affairs Committee last week. Great Britain, it now becomes known, would have the United States assent to the carrying of the blockade to the Canal Zone by giving up the Royal Navy permission to stop the shipment of goods from South America through the canal to Japan and Russia, thence to Nazi Germany. It was learned that the British government is sounding out administration leaders and officials high in the State Department on the proposition of cooperating on the stoppage of this traffic, even though it would be another violation of the neutrality belt laid down by the 21 American republics. The neutrality belt is the product of a conference of American republics initiated by the United States to carry out President Roosevelt's proposal to establish the neutrality belt, within which hostile acts by European belligerents were forbidden. This was only one of the multitude of engagements the 21 republics entered into to keep the war away from the two continents. Cairo, Egypt, January 28th. A Free French Camel Corps operating from Chad, the northern area of the Equatorial Africa, has begun an offensive against the Italians in southwestern Libya, thus opening a third fighting front in an African struggle menacing the whole of the Italian Empire. This new blow against the Italians was belatedly announced by radio tonight by General Georges Quetroy. He is an associate of General Charles de Gaulle, the supreme commander of all those Frenchmen who rejected the armistice with Germany and have been fighting on as Britain's allies. The Corps was assembled along the Libyan frontier early this month, Quetroy said. It crept slowly across the desert by night, hiding by day, until at last the men met and drove out the Italian garrison in the important oasis of Fezzan. The regional capital, Marzoik, was declared to have been raided in a fierce sudden assault which took the Italian defenders wholly by surprise. The town is 300 miles from the French base in Chad and lies some 700 miles to the southwest of Derna, Libya, where only today British Imperial forces were reported being rapidly reinforced for a general attack. The Camel Corps commander, General Colonna Durando, was said by General Courtois to have lost his life in the assault on Morzork. The general, moreover, disclosed without giving details that Free Frenchmen also are operating in Ethiopian territory. The third active front is between 1,500 and 2,500 miles away to the southeast. There, advancing British forces were said here to be closing in on the towns of Agordat and Berentu in Italian Eritrea. Argadat is an essential rail center some 40 miles within Eritrea, and there and at Berentu, a military informant said the disorganized Italians were preparing to make what stand they could. About both towns, the defense positions are known to be poor. Nevertheless, the British Air Force was taking no chances and reported that British bombers had assaulted Italian lines of communication to the rear, attacking the railroad stations of Keren and Aisha and railroad bridges and roads. Still, other British troops were declared to be pursuing an Italian column 3,000 to 4,000 strong, which had abandoned the post of Hagar near the Eritrean-Ethiopian border and had taken flight into an area which is infested with Ethiopian patriots aiding Britain. Recapitulating recent operations in East Africa, the British announced the capture of an Italian general, the 17th of that rank to fall into British hands in the whole campaign. The general was not identified nor the size of his command disclosed. It was stated that he had surrendered during a British bayonet charge. The British Air Force, claiming continued control of the air over Libya, announced that the skeletons of 7 burned seaplanes and the twisted girders of 2 smashed workshops were all that remain now of the Italian seaplane base at Bamba, southeast of Derna. Athens, January 29th. Greek mountain troops shattered 2 fresh Italian counterattacks north of Klysura yesterday and inflicted heavy losses on the fascists, a Greek government spokesman said early today. The Italians, supported by tanks, used mortars and hand grenades in the fighting. Our shock troops pushed the enemy from its defense positions and took another 70 prisoners, including a captain and considerable war material, the spokesman said. In the last few days, we have taken at least 100 prisoners, including an Alpini major. The Greek High Command reported 2 Italian planes were shot down. 1 person was killed and 10 wounded in a Salonika military hospital attacked by Italian aircraft, the Ministry of Home Security reported. The British Air Defense announced several direct hits in a bombing raid Monday on military buildings and stores at the Italian base of Elbasan in central Albania. A Greek communique said 3 Italian naval units shelled the village of Pecorni on the Adriatic coast south of Chamara on Sunday. There were no casualties, the communique added. Bitold, Yugoslavia, near the Albanian frontier, January 28th. Italian forces have been attacking heavily since early morning along the northern Albanian front from the region of the Shkumbi River to Lake Otrida, the Lake Otrida border, dispatches reported. Italian artillery was said to be pounding key Greek positions, but the Greeks were declared to be holding their ground and inflicting heavy losses. Despite heavy attacks in the Davol Valley, supported by low-flying planes, the Italians were reported to have been unable to break through. Valletta, Malta, January 28th. 4 British Air Force men were killed and 9 wounded in air raids before dawn today. Some government property was damaged during the raids, which prompted 4 alerts in Malta. Berlin, January 28th. A DNB German news agency dispatch from the Mediterranean said German battle planes had attacked Lucca Airport on Britain's mid-Mediterranean island stronghold of Malta. London, January 28th. German bombers ended London's 4-day respite from raids with a shower of incendiary and explosive bombs, which caused considerable damage to houses today. The 4 alarms in London were the first since last Thursday, but the attacks ended before dark, ushered in the 9th night without a raid warning. Sheets of gray metal resembling parts of a plane wing or fuselage fell in London, leading to the belief that at least one raider was shot down or damaged by anti-aircraft fire. Raiders were reported elsewhere over England. British trawlers, drifters, and merchantmen shot down at least 4 German planes during a Nazi attack on British shipping last Saturday, the Admiralty said today. This was 3 more than had been reported heretofore. Berlin, January 28th. DNB, the official German news agency today, in telling of long-range firing across the Dover Strait, said that it was directed at the harbor of Folkestone, 8 miles southwest of Dover. It said the shelling started yesterday afternoon and continued into the night. Washington, D.C., January 28th. A stupendous springtime onslaught on Britain, perhaps involving as many as 36,000 Nazi warplanes and a variety of surprises, was foreseen by well-informed sources today, but General George C. Marshall said the British could win in the end with the American help contemplated in the Lease Lend bill. He testified secretly before the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Marshall said all signs pointed to an attempt at invasion in April or May, preceded by a drive to obtain control of the air. Meanwhile, sources possessed of much inside information said the Nazis could put into the air 18,000 fighters and bombers, which as many planes and crews in reserve. Belief was expressed that the Germans may have developed a new pursuit ship and that torpedo planes may be used against ship convoys. London, January 28th. British naval authorities announced tersely today that the big war converted 21,833-ton liner Empress of Australia is safe in port, and one source suggested that radio messages reporting the vessel torpedoed and shelled might have been a German trick. The messages were received last night by the Miami, Florida station of Tropical Radio, which said they had no way of telling whether they were genuine. Beginning at 9:36 p.m. Chicago time, the messages over a period of about 20 minutes gave a staccato account of a torpedo striking of boats and of boats being lowered. They gave the position about 200 miles from Dakar, Senegal, French West Africa. A spokesman for the Federal Communications Commission said the commission's inspectors would not investigate the source of the distress calls received by Tropical unless we have some reason to think they came from somewhere in the United States. In less than 9 hours, the British authorities announced the Empress was safe in port. They declined to comment in any way on the reports of an attack, and it was noted that the announcement did not say the ship had arrived in port. Subsequently, unofficial informants said the Empress almost certainly was in port at the time of the alleged attack, and that it was possible a German ship or shore station somewhere had faked the calls in order to trick the British into giving out the Empress's whereabouts. The British, with traditional Admiralty caution, did not even say what side of the world the Empress was on. London, January 28th. A Stockholm radio broadcast heard here today said 2 Swedish vessels, the 3,759-ton Valparaiso and the 4,575-ton Sturholm, were overdue and presumed lost. New York, January 28th. The Swedish passenger ship Belgia, chartered by the Swedish government to transport 200 Swedish sailors from England to their homeland, has been set afire by air bombs and 6 crewmen are missing, the Swedish Foreign Office reported today. The American-Swedish News Exchange said the Foreign Office reported that the 2,023-ton vessel was bombed while en route from one British port to another for repairs. Apparently, the sailor passengers had not boarded the vessel. The Belgia's crew was rescued by a British warship before the Belgia ran aground in flames. Bucharest, January 28th. The Romanian government put M. Malaxa, wealthy munitions manufacturer, on trial today on charges that he furnished the tanks, arms, and munitions which the Iron Guard used in its abortive revolution last week. Premier General Ion Antonescu directed his new military government, meanwhile, to do whatever was necessary to guarantee the maintenance of order throughout the country. Government prosecutors said Malaxa, detained in a basement cell in the police barracks, permitted the rebels to convert his stone mansion in the heart of the city into a citadel during the revolt. The home virtually was wrecked by artillery before the rebels capitulated. Iron Guard associates of former Vice Premier Horia Sima, chief of the Iron Guard, insisted he was in flight, presumably by plane, while official circles reiterated that he was under arrest. Communist documents were reported found in his home. Soldiers who patrolled the streets were instructed to shoot on sight anyone with a machine gun. Police said the Iron Guard mayor of a provincial town confessed he and his wife killed and robbed 80 persons during the revolt. The loot from pillaged homes and shops already recovered is enough to fill 70 large motor trucks, police said. Army headquarters announced nearly 6,000 weapons, including 666 machine guns, had been confiscated. The government canceled all Romanian passports to prevent flight of the rebel leaders. Agents were sent to all provincial towns to see that the best citizens took municipal posts. The tomb of Arman Colonescu, arch enemy of the Iron Guard, who was blamed for the execution of thousands of its members in 1939, was dynamited by rebels during last week's revolt, it was disclosed. The charge destroyed the stone crypt and bodies of the former premier and his parents in the mausoleum at Curtea de Argeș in Transylvania. The Bucharest radio announced restrictions on carrying weapons would be eased for anyone previously threatened by the Iron Guard. Such persons may carry firearms for self-protection if they obtain permits. 40 additional industries were militarized, including shipyards, airplane, and rubber factories. Dmitry Sarandos, charged with the assassination 10 days ago of Major Doring of the German army, was quoted as having testified at his trial that the shooting was done with a revolver supplied by an Iron Guard policeman. It was reported that he testified he argued with Doring over a love affair. Chongqing, China, January 28th. Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek said today his action in dissolving the communist Fourth Chinese Army was solely to preserve military discipline and was not prompted by political considerations. I exercised Christian forgiveness unto 70 times 7 with the recalcitrant Fourth Army, he said in a report issued to the high government officials. But it continued to give out false reports vilifying the central government and taking arbitrary action until it was apparent if the Fourth Army were not checked, it would cease to be worthy of the name of the nation. In China today, there is absolute unanimity of purpose among all armies and the people in resistance against Japan. Hence, there is absolutely no ground for disagreement or civil war. My action was dictated solely by a desire to strengthen Chinese resistance, hence it was a blow at Japan. London, January 28th. Robert Boothby, resigned parliamentary secretary to the Food Ministry today, was convicted by the House of Commons on charges of conduct derogatory to the House in connection with a Czechoslovak fund scandal. The House approved a select committee report finding Boothby guilty of attempting to deceive the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, on whose petition Boothby was granted a hearing in Commons, described him as my personal friend, but said the government had no choice but to approve the committee report. He said Boothby's penalty is most severe, at least the interruption of a career of high parliamentary promise. Although he resigned his food ministry post when linked to the scandal, Boothby retained his seat in Parliament. Boothby testified he was motivated by impulses of high patriotism and friendship when he agreed to accept 10% of the money belonging to Richard Weininger, international banker, if he could induce the Treasury and Parliament to demand its release by Prague banks after Germany occupied Czechoslovakia. Boothby said he took up Czech claims on his own responsibility because the important thing was to stop £17 million or $68 million from going to the Nazis. This was done, he said. London, January 28th. Minus his steel helmet, a relic of the World War, Wendell Willkie plunged cheerfully about London today through 4 air raids. He acted as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened and permitted nothing to disturb his strenuous schedule. In the first Nazi visitation of the day and the first he had experienced, he was caught without the tin hat he brought from the United States, and he succeeded in entering the House of Commons without a gas mask, ordinarily required equipment for all admitted there. Attendance passed him because he is only a temporary resident of London. Prime Minister Winston Churchill immediately sent Willkie a gift of 3 gas masks and 6 modern helmets to be used by him and his party. I guess when he saw I was traveling without one, meaning a helmet, Willkie said, he thought we needed help. Willkie had just stepped out of St. Paul's Cathedral when the day's first air raid warning sounded. He cocked an ear, smiled, and said, "Fine, that's just fine." He inspected the bomb damage at St. Paul's and called it outrageous. Of course, he added, it is impossible to say in view of this whether the Germans were deliberately aiming at the cathedral or not. Nevertheless, it is outrageous. Willkie later talked with Montagu Norman, governor of the Bank of England, conferred with Sir Kingsley Wood, Chancellor of the Exchequer, sat for a half an hour in Commons listening to debate, and conferred half an hour with Cardinal Arthur Hensley, Roman Catholic Archbishop of Westminster. London, January 28th. While Wendell Willkie lunched today, a member of the House of Commons approached his table and asked, "Might you know my cousin in the United States?" "Where does he live?" Willkie asked. "In Elwood, Indiana," the MP replied. "That man's cousin was David Hopkins, whom I have long known," Willkie said later, but he could not recall the MP's name. Washington, D.C., January 28th. The Roosevelt administration's policy of attempted friendliness with Soviet Russia exploded in its face today when it was learned that the British government has protested against heavy United States exports to Russia, which are being used to aid Germany and Italy. In particular, the British, to whom the administration has pledged complete assistance in their efforts to defeat the Axis nations, have become disturbed by this government's sudden move toward chumminess with the Russian bear in removing the moral embargo against shipments of airplanes and aeronautical equipment to Russia. The embargo on planes was imposed by President Roosevelt on December 2nd, 1939, because of Russia's bombing of civilians in its invasion of Finland. In a friendly note to the Russian ambassador Konstantin Omansky last Tuesday, Undersecretary of State Sumner Welles officially removed the embargo directed against the Soviet Union and thereby took the sting out of the international reprimand. The move was viewed as a gesture toward winning the Russian away from the Axis powers. The British recently admitted failure at getting any better understanding with Russia. Today it became known in London and Washington that formal representations had been made by the British government to the United States and Russia concerning the exports which are allegedly aiding the Axis. It was recalled here that Germany and Russia have strong trade ties and only recently negotiated a new commercial agreement. Lisbon, Portugal, January 28th. Dr. Thomas Perrin, United States Surgeon General, and a party of 5 experts arrived here today aboard the SS Excalibur en route to London to study the British Defence Organisation. Dr. Perrin said the group would survey Britain's health services and social assistance. Quebec, January 28th. Opposition leader Maurice Duplessis told the Quebec Legislative Assembly today that development of the St. Lawrence Waterways project under present world conditions would constitute a national crime and would be a national suicide and a danger to international peace. The proposed canalization, Duplessis said, is not a Canadian project, is of no interest or advantage to Canadians, and would constitute unjustifiable expenses. The St. Lawrence Hydroelectric and Navigation Project has been pushed by President Roosevelt as a defense measure. Berlin, January 28th. Negotiations are underway for release of French war prisoners who have many children, it was announced tonight. Vichy, France, January 28th. One of the governmental changes, which a high source a few days ago said was in suspense until Ferdinand de Brennan, Vichy's ambassador to Paris, comes back with Adolf Hitler's answer to Marshal Henri Philippe Pétain, was announced today on the heels of the promulgation of a decree called Constitutional Act No. 7. Raphael Alibert, Minister of Justice and member of the cabinet since Pétain took over last June, has resigned and is being replaced by Joseph Barthélemy, member of the French Institute, eminent jurist and exponent of parliamentary democracy. Alibert, who had been responsible for drafting much of the legislation of the Marshal's regime, resigned several days ago, according to rumors, for reasons of health. There were unconfirmed reports that Pétain had received a reply to the letter he sent to Hitler on Christmas Eve, telling how Franco-German collaboration could continue. Berlin, January 28th. National Socialist Germany will observe the 8th anniversary of the party's accession to power on Thursday, and Adolf Hitler will make an important broadcast. Speculation has been aroused as to whether he will reply to President Roosevelt's last fireside chat and his message to Congress. With America's Help England program taking shape, the Fuhrer may devote part of his speech to that phase of the war against England. Rome, January 28th. Virginio Gaeta, the highly placed fascist editor, accused the United States today of planning to establish air and naval bases in the Portuguese-owned Azores as a threat to Europe. While Italy and Germany gave fresh evidence of consolidating plans to beat Britain this year, Gaeta said they were paying much attention to the moves by the United States, which are turning toward the Azores. His editorial, Eyes on the Azores, appearing in Il Giornale d'Italia, pointed to the strategic importance of the Azores as a refueling base for ships, a landing place for transatlantic planes, and a central point for transoceanic telegraph cables. Chongqing, China, January 28th. Education Minister Chen Li-fu declared tonight at a dinner in honor of the American, British, and Soviet Russian ambassadors that their country soon would be united with China against might. The Soviet ambassador answered with an expression of hope that 1941 would be China's year of victory. The others voiced confidence in the future. Istanbul, Turkey, January 28th. Secretary of State Hull's expression of confidence in Turkey's ability to repel an attack gives great satisfaction here and is prominently reproduced in the press. The Turks are certain that Hull's confidence is justified. Fully alive to the strength of Germany's mechanized army, they refuse to believe it can operate on the difficult terrain of the Balkans and Turkey as it did on the modern road systems of Flanders and France. London, January 28th. England recently experienced an intense cold wave in which 15-foot snowdrifts piled up in the North Country and some villages in northern Wales were cut off for days. During the cold snap, about which the censor banned publication of any information until today, it was difficult for auto transport to reach Scotland. The fast-flowing River Swale in Yorkshire was frozen over with a temperature of 8 degrees Fahrenheit prevailing in that area. Trucks operating between Liverpool and London encountered drifts 6 to 8 feet deep. 15-foot drifts on the moors between Lancashire and Yorkshire had to be cut with plows, and some rail transport was disrupted. London escaped the bitter cold, but 2 weeks ago there was a heavy snow in the capital and occasional brief falls. Heavy rains and thaws followed, and in each case, the snow failed to remain on the ground more than 3 days. Ottawa, Ontario, January 28th. Canada's decennial census, which legally should be taken this year, seemed likely to be suspended as a measure of war economy. It would cost about $2 million, and it is argued that the money and the time of 16,000 enumerators who would be employed should be devoted to war work. Paris, January 23rd, via Berlin, delayed. A wave of juvenile crime now is noted as one of the consequences of this city's semi-starved condition and the blackout. During the last week, arrests of youthful hold-up men have averaged for a day, but yesterday a band of 16 was seized, including 2 girls. The eldest of the group was 20 and the youngest 14. Their favorite operating ground was on the left bank of the Seine, near the School of Fine Arts. The gang met at night in a little wine shop and apportioned the sectors for each member to work. They usually robbed women, striking them with a blackjack and snatching their purses. The holdups were successful because of the blackout, which now is practically total, and the scanty policing of Paris after nightfall. One of the girls arrested gave her occupation as a school teacher. All of the youths claimed to have trades and apparently came from relatively respectable families. They pleaded they were stealing ration tickets, not money, because they could not get enough to eat under the present rations system. Their punishment is expected to be a problem. Public protests are anticipated if attempts are made to apply to them the decree which prescribes immediate trial before a special court for blackout holdups and the death penalty immediately executed for the use of firearms. There now is a dispute over the meaning of the word arms in the decree. Letters to the Paris press protesting against the severity of the decree insist its application should be limited to the use of firearms. Police officials, alarmed at the crime increase, want the word arms interpreted to include all blackjacks, bludgeons, and knives. Berlin, January 28th. Cocktails are popular in Berlin, but purists feel that the patriotic Germans should not use an English word for a German mixed drink. One of Berlin's biggest bars today advertised that its cocktail hour has now been christened Mischtrinkt Hour, which stands for mixed drinks. It is spelled as if it were a German word, which it is not. It is spelled Mischtrinck. Bern, Switzerland, January 28th. Winston Burdett, Belgrade representative of the Columbia Broadcasting System, has lost his permit to broadcast from Yugoslavia to the United States pending investigation of a story he cabled to New York last Sunday that there were serious riots in Milan and Turin. This information reached here today from Yugoslav diplomatic quarters. Havana, Cuba, January 28th. The arrest of a prominent Cuban lawyer for allegedly having expressed himself in favor of admitting Cuba as a state in the United States was ordered today by Minister of Interior Rodriguez Pintado. The minister said Rafael Calzadilla, president of the Bar Association of Guanabacoa, had cabled the President of the United States Senate the association's approval of Senator William H. Smathers, Democrat, New Jersey's resolution proposing Cuban admission to the Union. The association called the proposal, the minister said, the first favorable movement toward the realization of democracy. The Pas, Manitoba, January 28th. 100,000 barrenland caribou, members of the hardy northern species known for its annual migrations, have been sweeping down from the Arctic wastes to feeding grounds between the Pas and Churchill along the Hudson Bay Railway. F.F. Kerr recently returned from a fur-buying trip along the Hudson Bay and Canadian National Railways, estimated that 100 animals stood between each pair of telegraph poles. They were traveling 15 to 20 miles deep. At several points, it was necessary to blow the train's whistle to clear the tracks. Terrified, most of the caribous raced into the bush country, but a few of the older bucks stood their ground and bellowed their defiance. And now for national news. Washington, D.C., January 28th. Decision to set a definite time limit on the powers asked by President Roosevelt in his dictator bill was made today by both Republican and Democratic members of the House Foreign Affairs Committees in separate meetings. However, the GOP members advised a limitation of 1 year while the Democrats advocated for 2 years. The Republican and Democratic groups agreed on a total of 11 amendments, some duplicating each other, which they said would submit to the full committee. Representative Hamilton Fish of New York, ranking Republican member of the committee, said his group had agreed on 7 changes. Chairman Saul Bloom of New York said the Democrats would present 4 proposed amendments. The GOP recommendations are 1. Limit the life of the legislation to 1 year. 2. Prohibit the president from giving away any part of the Navy without the consent of Congress. 3. Prohibit the president from sending convoys into war zones without the consent of Congress. 4. Place a top of $2 billion on financial obligations that might be incurred under the legislation. 5. Limit and define a section providing that a bill shall supersede any existing statute with which it may be in conflict. 6. Prohibit the building, repairing, or outfitting of belligerent warships of any nation, either in either government or private shipyards within the United States. And 7. Require that the British give security for materials and equipment lent or leased to them until their funds are exhausted. The Democrats agreed on the following changes. 1. Limit to 2 years the powers of the president to lend, lease, or otherwise dispose of war supplies. Forbid United States vessels to convoy British ships. 3. Require the president to report to Congress all operations under the law. 4. Require the president to consult with the Army Chief of Staff and the Naval Chief of Operations before exercising powers granted him by the bill. The full committee will vote on the changes tomorrow, with a report to the House expected Thursday or Friday. Meantime, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee centered its fire on the balance sheet prepared by Sir Frederick Phillips, Undersecretary of the British Treasury, which purports to show that England is unable to pay cash for additional war materials manufactured in the United States. Under a steady pounding of questions for 5 hours, Secretary of the Treasury Henry Morgenthau Jr. admitted that no attempt had been made by the government to check the accuracy of the British figures, which astonished the financial world by their lowness when first made public recently. The statement has been used by the administration as an argument for the necessity of passing President Roosevelt's dictatorship bill, which delegates to the president unprecedented powers to transfer or give away weapons of war to Britain. The examination of Morgenthau yielded the following high points of testimony. 1. The American taxpayer has thus far paid approximately $7 billion in interest alone to the privilege of lending the Allies vast sums in the last World War, the principal of which remains unpaid. 2. Morgenthau mentally has written off for keeps Britain's debt for a total of $5,728,821, which was incurred during the last war. 3. The proposed increase in the United States debt limit from $49 to $65 billion will be sufficient for the Treasury's borrowing needs only until the end of the next fiscal year, June 30th, 1942. 4. The United States has impounded $1,593 million worth of French assets in this country and is closely guarding them. 5. British will quit fighting if the dictator measure is not passed, Morgenthau repeated on several occasions during his testimony. 6. British orders for 2,000 planes are being held up for lack of dollar exchange, and plane factories will soon be idle. This assertion brought from committee members queries concerning this nation's bogged-down production program. Senator Gerald P. Nye, Republican, North Dakota, bombarded Morgenthau with questions about the British balance sheet, which stated that England has $1,400,000,000 in gold and dollar exchange assets to pay for orders already placed, but no more money to take care of additional needs. Morgenthau insisted that he trusted the British figures completely and that his department had made no independent investigation to ascertain their accuracy. He asserted that the United States has not given one penny of aid to Britain thus far and refused to admit that the purchase of several billions of British gold at $35 an ounce could be considered as monetary aid to England. I have in mind, said Nye, a British corporation in this country which has consistently refused to sell its interests to would-be American purchasers. That makes me doubt whether the British are trying to convert all of their assets into cash. I would like to know if that corporation has been listed as British assets in this country. Morgenthau said he would give an answer to the question in executive session. St. John's, Newfoundland, January 28th. The United States troop transport Edmund B. Alexander, loaded with soldiers to man the new defense bases in Newfoundland, again today delayed its entry into St. John's Harbor because of poor visibility. The ship arrived here several days ago from New York, but has not negotiated the Narrows, where there is a clearance of only 15 feet on each side because of storms. These abated this morning and the ship approached the Narrows, but steamed back to the outer bay when mist obscured the passage. Victoria, British Columbia, January 28th. 3 seamen tossed from a capsizing lifeboat were reported missing tonight after earlier word that all 60 passengers and crewmen of the grounded American Army transport Kivitchek had reached shore safely. The seamen disappeared soon after the 1,200-ton vessel carrying Army base supplies from Seattle to Ketchikan, Alaska, grounded on rocks about 150 miles south of Prince Rupert, British Columbia, last night. Other lifeboats carried the passengers and most of the crew safely ashore despite the darkness and the swirling waters. As heavy seas flooded the deck of the wrecked ship, Captain W. W. Williamson and 12 of his crewmen remained aboard voluntarily. The passengers, including one woman and the remaining crewmen, were taken aboard the United States gunboat Charleston to continue the trip to Ketchikan. Vacancies for 180 recruits and Army units stationed in the Philippine Islands were announced yesterday by Brigadier General Charles H. Bonesteel, commander of the 6th Corps area. Jacksonville, Florida, January 28th. Fast planes slicing in V formation through the skies over Jacksonville have been adding a dash of excitement to this winter resort since the first of the year when the pilot training program at the Naval Air Station got underway. 25 cadets composed the first class of fledgling flyers. They made history the other day when they took off in the first mass flight from the runways of the still incomplete $25 million station. They would form the advance guard of a group of from 1,200 to 1,600 picked men who will be receiving flight instruction here when the 3,260-acre plant is finished. Officers and enlisted men at the station now number nearly 2,000. There will be 10,000 later on. Around 480 planes will be used. Also being completed near Jacksonville is $10 million Camp Blanding, one of the 2 largest troop training centers in the country. About 45,000 soldiers will be housed there. McCord Field, Washington, January 28th. A squadron of 9 Army bombing planes searched yesterday for a B-18 Douglas bomber which disappeared with a crew of 7 a few hours after leaving this field January 16th for the Muroc bombing range on the edge of the Mojave Desert in Southern California. No trace of the bomber or the crew were found. Searches previously had been made in Washington and Oregon, and the hunt today was centered over the lower Klamath River Valley. 4 lieutenants and 3 sergeants were aboard the plane when it took off for the bombing range by way of Sacramento, from which point a report had been expected. No word ever came from the plane. 24 hours after the plane left here, a report was received that a big plane had been sighted the previous day near the Oregon-California line and that it appeared to have been in distress. Police Chief H.M. McCabe of Reedsport, Oregon, a coastal town, set out yesterday with a searching party after hearing a report that a large airplane appeared to have crashed in the mountains 10 days ago. A blizzard was blowing over Northern California the day the plane took off, but the storm was not severe enough to prevent commercial planes from flying the coastal route. Washington, D.C., January 28th. Treasury officials today explained how a Massachusetts cranberry farmer happened to be overpaid by $1 million on his AAA benefit check. The farmer, Andrew Pananen, returned the check to the Treasury for correction. He was supposed to receive $15.25, but the check read $1,015.25 and could have been cashed. After frightening officials at his bank in Carver, Massachusetts, half out of their wits by presenting the check for payment, Pananen took it back and sent it to the Treasury. Officials explained that the electric check writing machines, which save government employees the trouble of writing out the New Deal's easy money checks, write a series of stars above the amount specified. In this case, however, the operator accidentally touched the $1 million key instead of the star-making key. Washington, D.C., January 28th. Apparently recovered from the cold which yesterday forced him to quit work in mid-morning, President Roosevelt was back at his desk today, keeping his usual allotment of appointments. His regular afternoon press conference was canceled, however, with the explanation that the president had no news and wanted to catch up on his mail. Mr. Roosevelt's brief illness did not prevent him from conferring last night with congressional leaders on possible amendments to his dictator bill. The conference included Republicans as well as Democrats. Sir Walter Citrine, Secretary of the British Congress of Labour, called today to thank the president for the magnificent efforts of this country in behalf of Great Britain. Washington, D.C., January 28th. A bill for the summary deportation of Harry Bridges, alien West Coast labor leader, was started through Congress again today. However, there was a possibility that action on it might be delayed pending the outcome of Justice Department proceedings against him. The measure was reported by the House Immigration Committee. The House passed it last year by a vote of 329 to 42, but a Senate committee killed it by substituting a resolution asking the Department of Justice to investigate Bridges. Last month, J. Edgar Hoover, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, disclosed that he had submitted a report to the Attorney General which confirms that Bridges is indeed a communist. Attorney General Robert H. Jackson is expected to order a public hearing on the FBI information. Bridges has made 3 applications for citizenship since he entered the United States from Australia on May 7, 1920, but he never obtained his final papers nor took the oath of allegiance. He was a leader in the San Francisco dock strike in 1934, which was so violent that troops were called to preserve order. He led strikes in 1936 and 1937, taking the West Coast stevedores out of the AFL and entering them in the CIO. New York, January 28th. A sweeping inquiry has been started by William B. Herlands, City Commissioner of Investigation, to determine the extent of communist influence in the Department of Welfare. This was disclosed in Supreme Court today after counsel for a dismissed employee had charged that more than 600 communists were employed in the department as social investigators. Doris Stahl of Brooklyn is suing the department for reinstatement as an investigator at a salary of $1,680 a year from the time of her dismissal on March 24, 1939. She charged that she was dismissed because of her anti-communistic activity. Leonard K. Rossi, counsel for Ms. Stahl and secretary to the Civil Service Forum, said in his opening statement that he would give the names of the 600 communists and also would give the Communist Party names under which they travel. He then read a letter from Commissioner Herlands stating that an investigation into the charges was underway. Entirely apart from the merits of your client's dismissal on charges of incompetence, wrote Herlands, the city is interested in making an investigation to determine whether the charges of communist activities in your petition are true. The letter also stated that Welfare Commissioner William Hodson had requested such an inquiry. Hodson and Herlins are appointees of Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia and subject to removal by him. Herlins heads the Department of Investigation and was an assistant to Thomas E. Dewey when Dewey was special prosecutor. After obtaining her welfare department job, the communists asked her to join them. Denver, Colorado, January 28th. Governors and Reclamation Association officials from 17 states of the South, Midwest, Southwest, and South have been asked to meet here the latter part of February to defend states' rights in opposing the proposed Arkansas Valley Authority project, which would dwarf the present TVA. Governor Ralph L. Carr of Colorado, militant foe of the proposal, said today he has sent invitations to the governors and reclamation leaders. The results of this meeting will determine the nature of the fight to be waged in Washington against the proposal. It is expected most of the governors of the states affected by the project will want to go in a body to the nation's capital to launch their protests. Bridgeport, Connecticut, January 28th. Joseph Spell, 31-year-old Negro chauffeur butler, told a Superior Court jury trying him on a rape charge today that he had been led on by his socially prominent employer, Mrs. John J. Strubing of Greenwich. He denied Mrs. Strubing's charge that he had thrice raped her after surprising her in her bedroom, forced her to write a $5,000 ransom note, and later threw her into a reservoir. Spell also asserted that at no time he had used force or threats against a woman. During examination by defense attorney Samuel E. Friedman, Spell asserted he drove Mrs. Strubing to Conseco Reservoir and at her request let her out of the car. There was a funny noise like she stumbled or fell, the defendant said, and he found she had gotten down to the water. Spell said he asked her to come back, but drove away after she told him to go on, I'm all right. He denied he pushed her into the reservoir and left her there to drown. And now for local and regional news. More than 5,000 persons are expected to attend the labor rally tomorrow night in Carmen's Hall, 328 South Ashland Avenue, at which working men and women will voice their opposition to intervention in Europe's war. The meeting is sponsored by the Chicago chapter of the America First Committee. Speakers will include Brigadier General Thomas S. Hammond, chairman of the Chicago chapter of America First, Edward L. Ryerson, Chicago industrialist, Mrs. Janet Ayer Fairbank, vice chairman of the Chicago chapter of America First, and a number of labor leaders. Clayton E. Pence, financial secretary of the Web Pressmen's Union, will be chairman. A plea for all-out aid to England was made by Ernest W. Gibson, national chairman of the Committee to Defend America, by aiding the Allies at a meeting at the University of Chicago last night. The meeting was held in the campus field house. About 2,000 persons attended. The field house capacity is 3,500. The meeting was sponsored by the Youth for Democracy Group, a student organization. In his talk, Gibson, a former United States Senator from Vermont, attacked the Chicago Tribune for its opposition to the Roosevelt Lend-Lease bill. Another speaker was Professor Quincy Wright. 60 students picketed the meeting. They carried placards denouncing the dictatorship bill and asserting, "This is not our war." About half of the pickets were described as members of the American Students' Union. Lieutenant Colonel Horace Thornton, a World War veteran and secretary of the Chamber of Commerce in Rockford, was appointed Chief of Staff of the 33rd Division Illinois National Guard yesterday by Governor Dwight H. Green. Lieutenant Colonel Thornton succeeds Colonel Harry Hill of Chicago, whose resignation became effective yesterday. Hill is retiring with the rank of Brigadier General. Lieutenant Colonel Thornton, who was a machine gun officer with the 129th Infantry in the World War, has been the ordnance officer on the 33rd Division staff for many years. He will accompany the division to Camp Forest, Tennessee, after its federal induction March 5th. The retiring Chief of Staff Colonel Hill is Chief Probation Officer of the Cook County Juvenile Court. He said last night that he was forced to resign his commission by a recent ruling of the Attorney General of Illinois prohibiting persons in public office from accepting paying positions with the federal government. 3 railroads yesterday ordered a total of 32 locomotives and 1,272 freight cars, the large purchases marking a continuation of the carrier's preparations for handling the increasing national defense traffic. Meantime, the purchase of 11,781 more trucks for the Army was announced. 4 Illinois companies shared in the railroad orders for the extent of 7 locomotives and 874 of the freight cars. The 4 contracts were part of a $4,338,000 purchase announced by the Missouri Pacific Lines. Electromotive Corporation, LaGrange, a subsidiary of General Motors Corporation, will build 1 1,000 horsepower and 3 600 horsepower diesel-electric switching engines for the Missouri Pacific. The building of airplane engines will become a permanent industry in Chicago, Harold S. Vance, chairman of the Studebaker Corporation, predicted today. It is commonly believed that the new plant that Studebaker is constructing here, he said, will pass out of existence when the present defense program is over. That is not likely. It is better than an even chance that it will become a permanent enterprise. Vance observed that the largest plane engine manufacturing plants are now located in Hartford, Connecticut and Paterson, New Jersey, and that the airplane assembly plants are centered mainly on the West Coast. Houses costing several $1 million are contemplated by various builders to care for a large share of the 14,000 workers to be employed in 2 Chicago area airplane engine manufacturing plants, it was learned yesterday. The homes are intended for some of the 10,000 expected to be employed by the Buick division of the General Motors Corporation and the 4,000 to be employed by the Studebaker Corporation. The Buick plant, costing $31 million, is to be built at North Avenue and LaGrange Road, Melrose Park. The Studebaker plant, one of 3 costing a total of $49,700,000, is to be built at Cicero and Archer Avenues near Chicago Airport. It was learned, meanwhile, that the Defense Plant Corporation, subsidiary of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, paid $940 an acre, or approximately $125,000, for the 133-acre tract for the Buick plant. The Defense Plant Corporation is to lease the plant to Buick. James U. Sammis, assistant to the receiver of the Bartenders Union, is expected to rejoin the Illinois National Guard soon as executive officer of the 108th Quartermaster Regiment. It was announced yesterday. Sammis will be commissioned as a lieutenant colonel and will succeed Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth L. Van Sickle, who retired last year. Colonel Richard Smykal, commander of the regiment, said he has sent a letter recommending Sammis for the position of Major General to Samuel T. Lawton, who will forward it to the War Department for final approval. Sammis, a World War veteran and former chief of the Lincoln Park Police, formerly held the rank of major in the National Guard and commanded the special troops of the 33rd Division. He resigned his commission in 1936 for business reasons. Last September, he was appointed assistant to Roy D. Keene, receiver for the Union. Elwood P. Walmsley, the 50th Chicago area pilot to be recruited for the Canadian or British Air Services, will leave today for Montreal, Canada. From there, he will go to England, where he will ferry planes from factories to squadron fields. Walmsley, who has a commercial pilot's license, has been a flying instructor at a Bloomington, Indiana airport. Walmsley, who is 26 years old and lives at 922 Gordon Terrace, is married and the father of 2 sons, Jack and Elwood Jr. Efforts to build up the nation's defense continue to be hampered by strikes. Here's the situation as reported yesterday. Kenosha, Wisconsin, January 28th. 200 men employed in the rolling mill and steel press department of the Simmons Company went on strike today after negotiations for a 15% wage increase fell through. Only these 2 departments are involved. Claude A. Watkins, city councilman and president of the AFL Union of Simmons employees, said, A conference between the union's executive board and the management is scheduled for tomorrow. Elmer W. Hannick, General Works Manager, said it was unfortunate that this incident had to occur. The company has been doing everything within its power to promote business and the welfare of all concerned. The Simmons Company has been making Army cots on national defense contracts. The company employs 2,800 men in the Kenosha plant. Springfield, Illinois, January 28th. Governor Dwight Green today tossed into the wastebasket the all-time high budget submitted to the Illinois General Assembly three weeks ago by his Democratic predecessor, John Stell, who held office only 100 days. In a special message to the legislature, the Republican executive said almost bluntly that the only purpose served by the Stell recommendations, which totaled $523,664,374, was to relieve Green of the constitutional duty of submitting proposals during the first month of the session. In effect, Governor Green said that Stell's recommendations should be ignored completely until the new administration machinery has surveyed the needs of the governor's departments with the fine-tooth comb of economy. Green reminded the lawmakers that his predecessor had submitted a budget several $million in excess of the estimated total state income. We cannot maintain the state in a solvent condition if we follow the budget estimates and appropriate more than the entire income of the state, said the governor. As we all know, the federal government, in order to carry out the necessary national defense program, is requesting a considerable increase in the amount our citizens must contribute toward the upkeep of its various divisions. It behooves us, therefore, to economize in conducting our state government, even to the extent of sacrificing laudable state activities, in order that our citizens may be required to pay the least amount of taxes commensurate with good government. Springfield, Illinois, January 28th. Stern words were exchanged behind closed doors in the State House today by Livingston E. Osborne, Governor Dwight Green's Director of Conservation, and W. Emery Lancaster, President of the Democratic-controlled Civil Service Commission over Civil Service Law Enforcement in Osborne's department. Although the controversy lasted for hours without reaching the stage of blows, the result represented a sort of a compromise between the two men in a dispute over the firing of 147 game wardens and inspectors by Osborne and the hiring of 7 replacements without reference to the Civil Service examination list for those positions. Governor Green, after receiving a report of the Bluff Conference, requested Osborne to make future replacements from the so-called eligible list. He cautioned his director, however, to closely investigate every employee drawn from the list to make sure that no civil service law had been violated. A state witness at the vote fraud conspiracy trial of Lawrence Rasmussen, a former deputy coroner, testified yesterday he met the defendant in November 1939 in the courtroom of County Judge Edmund K. Jarecki, and that Rasmussen said to him, "I could kick you in the pants. I thought you were out of the city. We were going to put all the blame on you." The witness was Paul Salanti, 3614 Lake Park Avenue, who was a Republican judge in the 15th precinct of the 1st Ward in the November 1938 election. He told his story under questioning of Richard B. Austin, Assistant State's Attorney, before a jury and Judge Stanley H. Klarkowski in the criminal court. Rasmussen, who was the Democratic captain in that precinct, and his assistant, John Franklin, are charged with conspiracy to violate the election laws. Salanti and 3 other members of the precinct election board also were indicted, but have been granted separate trials to enable them to testify for the state in the present case. Salanti said that on the day of the election in 1938, he saw Rasmussen peering into booths while voters were marking their ballots. Roy Booker, another Republican judge, one of those under indictment, protested to Rasmussen. Salanti said and showed him the election board rule book. Rasmussen told Booker to throw away the book, that he didn't want to be bothered with it. Then Rasmussen got mad. Indianapolis, Indiana, January 28th. A Republican Party subcommittee today prepared to open headquarters in Gary tomorrow to complete the investigation of alien votes on which is based the contest of the election of Governor Henry F. Schricker, only Democrat winner on the state ticket. Ralph F. Gates, 4th District GOP chairman, said he expected to establish headquarters in the Gary Hotel and to employ one or more professional investigators to obtain or organize evidence. A former employee of the Federal Bureau of Investigation is in line for one of the jobs. James P. A. Fulton, 5th District Chairman and a member of the subcommittee, said it will be desirable to retain expert attorneys to fight the contest through. Republican Party purse strings were untied last night after Glenn R. Hillis, Kokomo Republican, who was defeated by Schricker, told the state Central Committee that no more time should be lost in making the election facts public. He said that if the legislative committee, which has power to decide the contest, determines him to be the rightful winner, he expects to be seated as governor. Basketball and politics are the two favorite games in Indiana, and the fast-breaking style of play is favored by both. The analogy was used today by a GOP leader to explain the series of sudden stops and starts in the Hillis-Schricker contest. Results of the contest, if it is not killed by delay during the remaining 40 days of the legislative session, may profoundly alter the present Republican program. 3 bandits held Mr. and Mrs. Ben Ginsberg prisoners in their apartment at 5134 Greenwood Avenue for nearly 2 hours last night while they ransacked the house. Ginsberg is a wholesale jeweler at 29 West Madison Street. They finally left carrying several rings and a fur coat valued at $5,000. Jay Wolf, who commuted regularly from his Rock Island home to Oak Park to loot the residences of weekend vacationists, committed burglaries in New York City, Detroit, Davenport, Iowa, St. Louis, and in Pennsylvania during the last 5 years, police yesterday said he told them. Wolf, who is 27 years old, led policemen to his home Monday. They returned to Oak Park with $5,000 worth of fur coats, jewelry, silverware, and cameras, which he is said to have admitted stealing from apartments in Oak Park during the last 6 months. Fred Wolf, an unemployed cigar clerk living at 916 Anceles Street, plunged to his death yesterday from the 13th floor of the 24-story Insurance Exchange building at 175 West Jackson Boulevard. He was a World War veteran, about 45 years old. A note addressed Mother was found in Wolf's pocket. It read, "Sooner than suffer any longer, I've decided to end it all." Joseph Tolson, state's attorney of Kankakee County, asked the State Department of Public Welfare yesterday to assign criminologists to interview Omar Longton, who killed Miss Norma Altenbrunn Sunday at Bradley near Kankakee. Longton, an escaped inmate of the Kankakee State Hospital for the Insane, is to get a sanity test after a special grand jury considers the case. Longton is 29 years old. He has confessed that he beat, knifed, and raped Miss Altenbrunn, who was 22, because he suspected that she was in love with another man. The killer is now in jail in Kankakee. Joliet authorities prepared yesterday to ask the return from San Francisco of Herman Spreitzer, 66 years old, who escaped from the Joliet prison farm September 6, 1920. Spreitzer, sentenced to 1 year to life for manslaughter after a fatal stabbing in 1915 in Cook County, was caught when his fingerprints were sent to Washington after he registered as an alien. Less than an hour after he had been committed to the county jail's Alimony Row yesterday, Gerhard Anderson, 60 years old and unemployed carpenter, died in the sheriff's lockup in the county building, apparently a suicide. A partly filled bottle found near was believed to contain poison. Dr. Paul G. F. Schmidt, coroner's physician, said after a preliminary examination that he believed Anderson had taken something, probably poison. Chemical analysis of the contents of the bottle and of Anderson's vital organs will be made today. No auto deaths were reported in Cook County in the 48 hours ending at 4 p.m. yesterday. 77 persons have been killed in Cook County traffic accidents since January 1st. Of these, 58 died in Chicago, where 1,617 were injured during the same period. 3 firemen were injured yesterday when an explosion during a $75,000 fire blew doors and windows into the street and toppled a rear brick wall of the Hine Chimney and Construction Company, 1618 Fulton Street. The fire started in the Burlap and Cotton Products Company, 1620 and 24 Fulton Street. The firemen, all taken to the Presbyterian Hospital, were Edward Caulfield, Engine Company 107, possible skull fracture, Charles Clausen, Engine Company 57, fractured kneecap, and Charles Cena, Truck 19, head injuries. Marshal Michael J. Corrigan said the fire, which brought 32 pieces of equipment to the scene, appeared to be of spontaneous origin. A recommendation that the city withhold issuance of city vehicle tax stickers to individuals who cannot show personal property tax receipts made recently by the Chicago Real Estate Board will be presented to the council for consideration February 5th. Alderman Robert C. Quirk, 48th Ward, who will present it, said he sees merit in the program and that he will ask the council to refer the proposal to the Taxation Committee. Alderman Frank Keenan, the 49th Ward Taxation Committee chairman, said he will be glad to have the recommendation before his committee. The 6 major governments in Cook County have begun 1941 owing more than $25 million in unpaid bills. Taxpayers in the county will be asked to pay $6 million more in taxes in 1941 than last year, even though some governmental budget cuts have been made through salary slashes and layoffs. Public officials yesterday asserted that, in spite of the increased revenue from higher taxes and budget economies, employees of the local governments face the threat of payless days before the end of this year. They said the only method of averting an imminent financial crack-up is to put the county's tax collection machinery on a permanently sound basis, and to do so proposed a new tax law. Philip Harrington, Commissioner of Subways and Superhighways, and Edward E. Brown, spokesman for Chicago's transit lines, will return to Chicago this morning from Washington, D.C., bringing the latest terms on which Jesse H. Jones, Federal Loan Administrator, will approve a $53 million loan for Chicago transit improvements. Harrington disclosed last night in Washington that Jones's loan terms will require substantial revisions in Chicago's proposed unified traction ordinance now before the city council. He and Brown conferred yesterday with Jones for several hours yesterday. And in sports, Boston, Massachusetts, January 28th. The Chicago Blackhawks, who had been breezing along with a record of only 1 defeat in their last 9 games, were tripped up tonight when they encountered the Boston Bruins, who also had something to be proud of in 13 consecutive games without being beaten. The Boston team ran this string to 14 by whipping the Hawks 3-2 before a crowd of 13,000 in the Boston Garden. The Kitchener line made 2 of the Boston goals. This combination got the first in the opening minute of the second period after both teams had been held scoreless in the opening frame. In the third session, the trio wrapped in another goal, which proved to be the winning one, less than a minute after the Blackhawks had beaten goalie Frank Brimsek for the first time in the game. Bobby Bauer, the tiny right wing, scored the first tally after taking a perfect pass from Woody Dumart, who had taken the puck behind the Hawk net off the stick of Milt Schmidt. Dumart accounted for the other Kitchener line tally, roaring in for Bauer's pass when that wing was tied up by the Hawk defense after taking the puck from Schmidt. Billy Cowley, current league scoring leader, added another point to his total with the other Bruin goal. Bob Karst gave Chicago its first score halfway through the third period, with Bill Herxheimer assisting. Coley Dahlstrom collected the other while Desi Smith was serving time. Herxheimer also collecting an assist on this one. The Hawks now move on to New York, where they will meet the Americans Thursday evening. Dick Fisher moved up into a tie for second place in the Big Ten scoring race Monday night by contributing 24 points to Ohio State's total as the Buckeyes lost to Minnesota in overtime. Fisher's spurt brought his total for 5 games to 64, 13 less than Gene England of Wisconsin, who has participated in 6 games. Fisher's performance against Minnesota tied the season individual high for one game set by Bill Menke of Indiana against Illinois. Jim Mandler of Michigan, who has played in 7 games, got 12 points Monday night to tie Fisher for second place in the standings. Another Wolverine, Mike Sofiak, trails the tie for second with 61 points. Fifth place in the standings belongs to Henry Clausen of Northwestern, who has scored 55 points in 5 games with 23 field goals and 9 free throws. 101 players have scored points in the Big Ten race to date, and Fisher leads the pack in field goals with 30, an average of 6 per game. From time to time, an outstanding basketball player comes up from one of the colleges in the Chicago area. In recent years, there have been such stars as Charlie Murphy, Wilbur Kautz, and Mike Novak of Loyola, Ed Campion and Bob New of DePaul, and Bob Harlow of Chicago, and Joe Reif of Northwestern. This season, there are 2 Chicago players who are among the leading performers and scorers in the country. They are Elmer Gaynor of DePaul and Mickey Rotner of Loyola. These 2 boys will oppose each other at the Coliseum February 9th when Loyola and DePaul meet in the annual game sponsored by the Catholic Youth Organization for the CYO Needy Youth Fund benefit. Gaynor and Rotner are the leading scorers for their respective teams. With the season half completed, each boy has averaged 13 points per game. Rotner, a mid-year student who has just completed his first year of eligibility, has scored 195 points in 16 games to break the sophomore mark of 186 made 13 years ago by Charlie Freed Murphy in 20 games. Lafayette, Indiana, January 28th. Purdue, although showing the effects of a 2-week layoff, outclassed Detroit tonight 38-16 in a tune-up for the resumption of the Big Ten campaign against Indiana here Saturday night. Purdue led at the half 19-6. Frosty Sproul was high scorer with 3 field goals and 3 free throws for 9 points. When the Chicago Bruins and the Sheboygan Redskins meet in a National Basketball League contest tonight in the 132nd Regiment Armory, Madison and Rockwell Streets, Otto Kolar, captain and center of the Redskins, will be honored by Cicero fans. Kolar is a Cicero boy. The Palmer House Panthers and Bronzeville Merchants of the Windy City League will meet in a preliminary at 7:45 o'clock. Chicago has an opportunity to pass the Badger Quintet with victories here tonight and at Sheboygan tomorrow evening when the same teams meet again. Should the Bruins win both games, they would climb to 3rd place and go over 500 in percentage with 8 victories and 7 defeats. With the exception of Kolar, who is one of the few players in the National League without a college background, the Redskins have a former Marquette University lineup with Paul Saccotti and George Hessick at forwards and Dave Quibius and Bill McDonald at guards. The Redskins are noted for a strong defense. On the other hand, the Bruins with Wibbs Kautz, Bill Happick, and Mike Novak potentially are one of the highest scoring units in the circuit. Novak and Kautz finished 4th and 5th among the league's individual scorers last year, and Happick, who led the Big Ten in scoring last season, has scored consistently. In their first meeting, the Bruins won 27-20 at Sheboygan, but the Redskins evened matters New Year's night when they defeated the Chicago team 34-32. Since that contest, the Bruins have improved in free throws, a phase of the game which cost them dearly in early season games. New York, January 28th. Red Berman is planning to mix a little of Jack Dempsey's hook to the body with some of Max Schmeling's overhand right to the chin as the cocktail he hopes Joe Louis won't like in their heavyweight title fight Friday night. He revealed this much of his plans today for his Madison Square Garden battle with Louis. Even the Dempsey-Schmeling ingredients couldn't change the minds of all but Red's very best friends that no matter what the potion, it can only mean a bad headache for the Baltimore fighter. Red's trainers Eddie Ross and Jaime Blostein pointed out that he half crouches and weaves in a manner reminiscent of Dempsey. Red picked up some of this style as protege of Dempsey in the last few years. With that much in his repertoire, his handlers explained, Red figured it would be a good idea to toss in a little of what Schmeling meant when he said, I z zoomzing, shortly before Max's first fling at the bomber in 1936. What Schmeling z'd that time was that Joe dropped his left shoulder after delivering a jab and was wide open for a right. However, that was Schmeling's very fine right hand, and this is Berman. Sure, I'm training with that in view, Red said at his Summit, New Jersey training camp today. After all, there must be some way to beat Lewis, and if I haven't found the way, suppose you tell me something better than the Dempsey-Schmeling technique. And that is sports, and that is news as read from the Chicago Tribune. Henry Chop reporting, January 29th, 1941. Have a swell day.